Hey, Causal Bandits. Welcome to the...
Hi, Causal Bandits. This episode is special for two reasons, and that's why I decided to record this intro in person. First, this is the last guest episode in the first season of the Causal Bandits podcast. It has been an incredible journey so far. We've published 23 episodes, recorded in 13 different locations across the globe. We've visited Europe, Asia, and Americas. And over the last 10 months, the podcast gained over 30,000 views and over 1,300 subscribers on YouTube. And last month, we crossed 1,300 monthly downloads on podcast platforms. And I want to personally thank you for being here and supporting this podcast. It means a lot to me. The second reason why this episode is special is the guest. His work has pretty literally changed the course of my life, and I'm honored and incredibly grateful for an opportunity to record this conversation with him at his home in Los Angeles. Ladies and gentlemen, to anybody who knows something about modern causality, he needs no introduction. He loves history, philosophy, and music, and I believe it's fair to say that he's the godfather of modern causality. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Judea Pearl. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Judea Pearl.
Hi, everybody. Good to be with Alex here.
Great. Yuda, thank you so much. I'm super grateful for our meeting today. And before we start, I wanted to tell you that your works pretty literally changed the direction of my life. Because the Book of Why was...
Where were you before?
Well, before... So I will tell you in a second. I just wanted to share with you that I'm really grateful for your work, in particular for the Book of Why, because this is how my adventure with modern causality has started. How has this started for you?
What, causality?
Yes.
I have an anecdote on that. That in the junior class in high school, our teacher, Feuchtwanger, tried to introduce us to the wonders of logic. He wanted to motivate us. Here is a logical problem, a logical paradox that can be rectified only if you have the tools of logic. Mm-hmm. If you don't have it, you fall into conclusions. So how did he motivate us? He told us a story about the smallpox in 1840 in France, where they started vaccinating people, and then they discovered that the number of people that died because of the vaccination itself is larger than the number of people that died out of smallpox. So people start protesting, maybe we should ban the vaccination, not realizing that actually the data prove the opposite, that the vaccination is effective. The reason why so few people died because of the smallpox was because the vaccination was successful. So they fell into this kind of wrong conclusion. So he was going to show us that logic has the power formally to rectify your paradox. But he didn't. That it motivated us, and we were all enchanted. Only later on, when I did artificial intelligence, I tried to work out this problem to see if the tools of logic could turn out straight. They didn't, because there was not any language in which to say number of people that died from. How do you say died from? Mm-hmm. There's no way to say it. How do you can count the number of people who are dead, but from a certain factor, that's hard to formulate in the tools available at that time. So that was fascinating to me, and I looked for the language in which we can formulate it. It took a long time. Only recently we have actually the correct solution for this problem. Given the number of people, what can you say about the effectiveness of the vaccination? Mm-hmm. So, but what the motivation? But I would say that recently Speaking from the time I've been working in artificial intelligence, the challenge of causality only came in the 1980s. So after my book on a Bayesian network came out, which was purely probabilistic, I already knew that I'm missing something. I was saying that managing uncertainty with the Bayesian rules is the the best way to handle things, but I understood that the success of Bayesian network came from a different source. It came from the simple reason that Bayesian networks are constructed in the causal direction and not counter to it. And that was the secret of their success. So I felt already that I'm missing something. In 1988, when the book came out, then I already felt that I need to go in a different direction.
Yeah. And that was the time when you realized that Bayesian networks are not enough and you moved into the formalism of structural causal models?
Structural came later, in 1991, I believe, that when Thomas Verma and I tried to formalize and bulky and formalize counterfactuals with deterministic functions. Purely deterministic, where the uncertainty comes only when the boundary conditions are uncertain, namely the U variables or the error variables, but everything is deterministic. And it was, for us, it was a trauma, because we worked for 2 decades on probabilistic reasoning. Everything was stochastic, and here we are formulating everything in deterministic functions. It took some time to convince ourselves we are on the right track.
The teacher, the physics teacher that you mentioned, it turns out that he was also a teacher of Daniel Kahneman, who passed away recently.
That's 2 weeks ago. And Daniel just mentioned to me, I think in the last year, he wrote me a message and said that he read this anecdote about a teacher, and the name is not coincidental because we also had a teacher named Feuchtwanger. By the way, Feuchtwanger, the same family of Leon Feuchtwanger, who was a very successful author in Germany at that time, and it's a very huge family. It has many branches. I worked in my summer job in the uncle of Feuchtwanger also.
Oh,
he was an electrical contractor. He used to wire public institution, wire the electricity to public institution, and I worked there as a cable puller. So
many connections.
One word, the word Feuchtwanger. But the interesting thing was that Daniel Kahneman also had the same teacher, and we started talking about our teacher and how good they were, and they were really something that we look back, we don't find teachers like that today. A teacher can come to class and without any notes can talk about any topic whatsoever. The gross national product of Kamchatka, okay? Everything. They knew geography and economics and physics and mathematics. It was really, we were lucky. My generation was lucky to be part of these educational experiments.
Speaking of Daniel Kahneman, his work was focused, a large part of his work was focused, his and Amos Tversky's work, on the biases and errors, systematic errors in human reasoning. When we think about intelligence from this perspective, we could probably hypothesize that there are some maybe evolutionary reasons for these errors to propagate in humans. Do you think that an general artificial intelligence system should be a system that always reasons correctly in formal sense? Let it be logically or causally?
I don't know what the word should means. We human are constrained by our resources. We don't have the power to reason all the way, so we reason quickly because we have to make decisions quickly. So we're building in shortcuts. The shortcuts have errors in them. By definition, it's shortcut. You didn't go and search all the way. You didn't think of all the factors. You found only the main factors, and you make a decision. It's laden with errors and biases. Because it depends on the kind of shortcut you make. You're talking about large machines. They do not have these limitations in the resources. So I don't know. They may just not have those biases because they can afford to search deeper and come out with a more reasoned conclusion, unless they are limited by other things.
Mm-hmm.
They could be limited by the samples that they can access. Not everything is in a training set, but it's a different kind of animal, the new machine, because they have different computational limitations than we do. So that's why I hate to speculate. We do not have the vocabulary or the metaphors to even begin to predict how they're going to behave in 10 years.
In your work with Elias Barenboim, you have demonstrated that we cannot learn certain structures, model certain structures based solely on observational data. When large language models appeared in the field, they entered the field, there was a debate that is still an ongoing debate regarding what those models can learn. So some people said, hi, they can actually learn world models. Other people said, no, it's impossible. We know this from the causal hierarchy theorems and so on. But when we look at this from a slightly different perspective, for instance, perspective proposed by Andrew Lampinen from DeepMind, he says those models can actually learn active causal strategies from passive data. So he makes this distinction. He says this is passive data, which means some of this data is observational, but some actually is interventional because it describes experiments, or some of this data is actually maybe some interactions between people, like in a discussion forum and so on and so on. And so in his work, he has shown that, at least in simple cases, a large language model, transformer-based large language model, can learn how to generalize causal reasoning. What are your thoughts about LLMs today and their limitations? You said you hate to speculate, so I don't want to push you into speculation, but do you have any thoughts about the future as well?
The basic difference is that the LLM, the large language models, have a new kind of data in their training set. It's not the data that comes from the environment. It comes from people who wrote articles, and these people have causal model of the world, and so we can learn from their models. We can just copy their model.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If you copy somebody's model of the world, it doesn't mean you learn the model of the world from data. You learn it from another person who had this model. Okay? So therefore, they are not tied or constrained by the ladder of causation. Okay? They actually access the data. The data contains text produced by people who have model of the world. So either you copy them, but if it don't have a explicit matching between the query and then you compose them together by building a salad of associations among the causal model that were authored by people. Fine. Well, now we are working with a salad. How the salad works, I don't know. It's a very strange kind of mixture, and we have to experiment with as a black box, a new black box.
Mm-hmm.
Salad of rumors.
A salad of rumors.
Yes. About causal model.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful one.
Yes.
I love this name. Yeah, so that's very interesting. We have some papers showing that those models can perform pretty well on some causal benchmarks, and then they perform very, very bad on other causal benchmarks. Perhaps they haven't read
What
enough
are the
rumors.
causal benchmarks?
Oh, that's a great question.
The toy problem that I have in my book?
Oh, no, people have like different like causal reasoning benchmarks nowadays. So
I don't love them. I don't like them because they are too big. What, the COVID-19, that's a benchmark? You cannot handle it. You don't understand. The data is so large. You don't have a ground truth. I like to work with a firing squad for variables, okay? And a simple question. What if rifleman one refrain from shooting? This is, I understand what the ground truth, what kind of answer I do expect. So I can manipulate it and see under what condition it works well and when it doesn't. So this is my benchmark. And I can tell you the story that how I experiment with LLMs on the firing squad problem. So first it tells me, firing squad, it's illegal to shoot in California. That was the first thing. You have to be very careful when you start firing. And so I said, forget about it. Let's start talking about causal modeling. Slowly, he got the idea. And he told me, yeah, if you're telling me that the rifleman listens only to the captain, and if you tell me he keep on all repeating the assumption, even though the assumptions were derivable already from the story, he said, if this is true, then you're right. If riflemen one refrain from shooting, the prisoner will still be dead. If you prompt it more and more, and tell him, but you have already the answer, why do you have to repeat? Eventually you'll get it right. So it's really an exercise in prompting. So you're dealing with a black box, and you're asking, what kind of prompt will give you the answer that you expect? Here, we know what answer we expect. In big problem, we don't know the answer we expect. So I like to experiment with the firing squad.
Yeah, so there's actually one benchmark that builds on top of this kind of approach. It was proposed by Xijing Jing and Bernard Shilkov and other authors. They build basically an engine that generates stories like this, like the firing squad.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, with the ground truth as well.
Yeah.
And they generate stories on on each of the ranks of the ladder of causation.
Yeah, the stories comes in the form of elements, factors, objects that we are understanding in our everyday life, or comes in the form of a variable. Variable X, variable Y, and just names of variables, or names that mean something to a baby.
That's a great question, because it turns out that large language models perform much, much poorer if we use variables instead of objects.
Yeah.
Which, in a sense, it's similar to humans.
It means that they have the baby world under control.
If you could advise a causal community today on choosing the directions for research for the next 5-10 years, what would that be?
Personalized medicine. Individualized decision making. Because we have done some recent work, with Scott. It's something we didn't think is feasible 5 years ago. And now we see that we can answer questions about probability of harm. And quantifying harm is very important in medicine. As I told you in a lecture, it's also important in political science. And quantifying benefit, swing states and things like that. It's everywhere in business, in marketing. You always make a decision on a particular situation, specific, and you want to compare doing it versus not doing it to this particular setup. Not population, but this particular setup. So, we have now the means of answering a situation-specific question. And that should be put into use.
some practitioners, referring to your works with Scott, say that it might be difficult in certain cases to sample from population.
Yeah.
To get the observational data that is sampled from population at random or representatively.
Actually, they argue that when you sample from population, it's a different kind of population than the one on which you experiment.
Mm-hmm.
Because in order to get to experiments, you have to have all kind of condition, parents' agreement, and you have to sign papers, and you are being incentivized by payment or by good treatment. The people who are selected for randomized control trial are different kind of people than those that you can get on a telephone book.
Yeah.
So that is maybe correct. But in many exercises, you get both population or both experimental and observational data from the same population. For instance, if you are doing a causal discovery and you have a graph, the graph generates for you the observational data, that's P of X, Y, Z, together with the interventional data, which you can get by the do operator on the graph. So you have, in the same population, in the same mathematical object, can generate both. I mean, you have both, and you can narrow the bounds and get good bounds, informative bounds on individual behavior.
Yeah, I think this is a very, very promising direction. What do you think is the cause of the rift that we have in the causal community? So we have people who are maybe coming from your tradition, graphical tradition, and identification.
Are there anyone else?
Well, there are trialists, right? That's right. There are people in epidemiology and people in economics. And, I must say that from my perspective, I see today that more and more people are using graphs. There's virtually no one who is not using graphs today. But still, there are those different traditions and different modes of thinking. And sometimes people in those different sub-communities are just speaking different language, using different language, speaking about the very same thing, the very same issue. And this is problematic, I think, because we lose the efficiency of research.
They cannot communicate.
Yeah.
Sometimes we duplicate work.
Yes, exactly.
And sometimes we just object to each other's results on the basis of misunderstanding what the results are.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what can I say? We have a few theorems that we should consult, and the theorem says that the potential outcome framework is logically equivalent to the structural causal models, and which means that a theorem in one framework is also a theorem in another. An assumption in one framework can be articulated as an assumption in the other framework. So it's a logical equivalence. The only difference is whether you feel comfortable articulating your assumption or your knowledge in general, in one language or in another. And it so happens that I feel more comfortable, and everybody that I know feel more comfortable. Even people who are doing potential outcome feel more comfortable. They're actually doing graphs in their mind, and they put down equations to pacify the reviewers in their field. Because no one can think in terms of conditional ignorability. Or you can put down assumption in conditional probability format without even thinking whether it is defensible or not, because it helps you get the equation, get the identification right. Okay, so you can do that, and many are doing that. But when you come down to ask, can I defend this conditional ignorability assumption that it makes sense in my setup? I don't know of any mortal that can answer this question.
Yuda, what do you think is the next thing in artificial intelligence? Where should we look?
Everybody is looking at large language models now. No matter what I say, people are going to play with the large language model, which is fascinating. I'm using them too, for different purpose. Yeah, they help me improve my text when I write papers. and they allow me to find new metaphors.
Mhm.
Yeah. I can ask it, give me some poetical expression for this idea. And that's beautiful. Really. And we know how to, if we are coming from causal inference, we know how to use large language model to benefit. With a functional approximator, and once we can express the answer to our queries in a collection of functions, we know what engines will approximate those functions on the basis of sampling from data, yeah, and we know how to put it together. The theory tells you how you put together expression from one do expression from another do expression or probabilistic equation, so we know how to compose them. So there is a hybrid of causal inference and large language model that we know how to handle today. What the future is going to be, hard to speculate. I really don't know. Right? Well, we have many areas which automatically are begging to be explored. Automatic scientists, scientists that can decide on the best experiment to conduct next, because there is a dilemma in theory. Free will, it's another thing which I touched on in the last chapter of the Book of Why, which I think will be solved. Solved to the satisfaction of all the philosophers that call it the chaos of science, or scandal of science. That's what philosophers call it. It's going to be solved because the illusion of free will evidently has some survival value. Yeah? Otherwise, we wouldn't obtain this. We wouldn't get hooked on this illusion for so many decades, so many centuries. So evidently it has a survival value. When we exercise intelligent machine over a large number of environments, eventually those who will have the illusion of free will survive and will overcome the others, right? So, and we learn what is the computational advantage of this illusion, and then we can program it. And what will be the answer? There will be computer systems that act as though they have a free will, even though they are just neural firing. They don't have free will, yeah, but they will act as though they have free will, and they will understand us when we talked about our free will. Yeah. So it will be a trustable system.
You mentioned the idea of the automated scientist. Some time ago, just a couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with a person from one of the national labs here in the US, and they told me that they cannot anymore afford using brute force in scientific experimentation. They do stuff in chemistry, in physics, and so on.
They cannot afford to do what?
Brute force, which means like just do this experiment, do that experiment, you know. So they want something smarter. And the idea of automated scientists is something that they are looking for. And now some of the people that are trying to construct automated scientists like this today, one of the challenges that they face is that it's difficult somehow to encode in a model like this the entire possible space of starting points. Another thing is that they say that it's difficult to make the model understand which direction it should go into.
I don't understand it.
Okay.
What is the input? What is the output? I think like engineering. I was an electrical engineer.
Great question. So I understand that the input is some knowledge that we have today.
Yeah.
And some measurements that are coming from different measurement systems. Yeah. And then what I know people are trying to do, for instance, is to use some kind of Bayesian optimization, like a Gaussian process or something like this, in order to look for another feasible hypothesis.
Let's take an example. I cannot think in generalities. You believe that malaria is caused by bad air from swamp, okay? what does it
I mean,
take?
I don't, but
No, but we used to believe.
yes, of course.
Okay.
Hence the name, right?
Right.
Malaria.
Malaria. Malaria. And eventually we came up to the conclusion, no, it was a mosquito called Anopheles, whose bite transfer we moved from one model to another. Is that a good example of what they're looking for?
Yeah, I think so. I think that would be a good model.
Yeah. So in this case, the survival value lies in either taking a mosquito net or taking an air mask, which is going to be more effective when you go to the swamp.
Yeah.
We have a survival value. One model begs a different preventive action than another. One is correct and one is not. How one can learn it or hypothesize that there might be something else. I think the way to go about it is local perturbation on existing model.
Mm-hmm.
You have a link between going to the swamp and malaria. Okay? And you ask, is there any intermediate variable that we can intervene on? This is a general scheme. Okay? So now we're going to experiment with different intervening variables. Okay? What could it be? Local perturbation on the model is something which corresponds to, it's a toy example of changing paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But it might just work from this local perturbation. You can test one by another and outcome the correct model or the invention of the vitamin C.
Yeah.
Link experiment.
So I understand what you're saying is that we can come up with a hypothesis to intervene on the existing hypothesis, on the existing model that we have.
Yes.
And then basically perform a simple experiment, right? And see what the intervention leads to what changes in the outcome. Sometimes I think, though, that it might be difficult. In the malaria example, we have somebody thought at one day, hey, there are mosquitoes there. Maybe we can, change something related to the mosquitoes. And this lead this person to design the intervention that turned out to make sense for all of us today. But sometimes we just don't know. We might not know, probably depending on the case. We might not know what is the set of possible interventions, or like which subset of all possible interventions we should look through. What are your thoughts on this?
It has to be situation specific.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if you see mosquitoes, then the hypothesis is generated. Perhaps there's something to the mosquitoes, but you also see other things. You see green grass in the swamp, right? So maybe the green grass. Yeah. So, and then comes the power of metaphors. We know that mosquitoes are capable of doing certain things, and green grass is not capable of certain things. And there's also the germ theory of disease that comes into play. And we are able to put all this together. The systems that we have now are not capable. But metaphor is another powerful reason by analogy. It is another powerful mode that has not been tackled in artificial intelligence.
It sounds to me, resembles to me the idea of affordances. Like the object has something. When I look at a chair, I already think what I can do with the chair.
Right, yes.
Yeah. There's like a lot of contextual knowledge that I bring into the scene. What do you think are the main blockers today that stop us from, as a community, applying causality more broadly in industry?
There are many blockages. Funding is one, language is another, training is the third one, lack of platforms, or you can mention, but I think mainly it's attention.
Mm-hmm.
People do not pay attention to the limitations which are predicted by causality or by the virtue of the knowledge that we acquired in causal reasonings. if I talk to a machine learning person, he wouldn't know what I'm talking about. Everything is sampling, interpolations, curve fitting, and everything is in the data. It's a barrier. It's a big barrier. It's a matter of changing paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And as Thomas Kuhn so keenly said, you can't expect people to change paradigm every 10 years. And now we have to change it every 10 years. And people are paid and they are rewarded by continuing to work in the same paradigm. And they are paid to continue that and not to change it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't expect them to change language. Look at all the statisticians. They are still doing regression.
I know at least one statistician that doesn't agree with your your diagnosis.
Because he said, no, we are statisticians. Causal modeling has been our guideline from day one, from Fisher, right? And we are doing it. Okay, fine. You pick up a statistics book and show me in the index the word cause. You wouldn't find it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in principle. You know, when I had statistics classes, for instance, we were learning about SEM, structural equation models.
Right. Yes.
So this is a model that can represent causality in general, at least in certain cases, some modification, some variations of those models, and so on.
There's still a journal of structural equation model, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
But the way I was taught it. So, well, my first question was like, okay, so we have some covariance matrices fitting and some blah, 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 and some other statistical stuff, which is, well, it is very important. But how is it different from any other statistical method? That was my question. How do I know if I fit this model to one structure versus another structure? Which one should I pick? And what I was told in my classes was that whichever has better fit to the data, which is Bayesian information criteria, measured as by Bayesian information criteria or something like this. But this is a terrible advice, actually. And we know that we can build a statistical model, fit it to causal data in a way that is not correct and get actually better fit to the data than a causal model. The thing is that the non-causal fit will not generalize under distribution shift, right? And the other one will. So in the sense, I agree with you that I think we need a shift in education as well. Or maybe primarily we need shift in education, how we teach people.
Yes. Every college has a statistics department. Not every college has a causal inference department. If you just change it to, wow. No, statistics should be a special case, a special branch of causal inference. That's dealing with the lower level of the ladder. I'm not saying it's simpler. It's a lot of intricate questions you can ask about efficiency of estimators and things of that sort within the level. But you should have in mind the entire ladder so you can move and ask reasonable, meaningful. By the way, when I looked into a structural equation model, the answer that I got was it's a parsimonious representation of the covariance matrix, which also is meaningful. That's what the answer I got from Peter Bentler, who is the author of several books in structural equation model. Okay?
Yeah.
So the answer was, what is structural equation model? It's a parsimonious representation of the covariance matrix. Nothing else, but it's also meaningful. Why is meaningful? The word causation did not appear. It's meaningful because it represents your causal model, namely your knowledge.
Yeah.
What we call knowledge is really not just data. It's data plus the ropes behind the data. That is causal model.
Structure.
So that is what makes it meaningful.
The last keynote presentation during this year's CLEAR conference that took place here nearby at the UCLA campus, your campus, was by Elizabeth Tipton. And she talked about her experience with so-called evidence-based framework that heavily relies on randomized controlled trials. She gave some examples, very eye-opening examples from the field of education and interventions in schools. And one of the challenges that she talked about was that although there were randomized controlled trials behind the interventions, people didn't want to use those interventions because they were asking a question, how does this apply to my particular school? So they understood that there was some intervention, but they were not convinced that the results of this intervention can be translated to their use case. And I found it very interesting. And we know that we have some results from your work and your students' work that can help us translating such interventions to particular cases, at least in certain cases.
They are right, in the sense that in order to use our method, the method of data fusion, taking results of several randomized experiments and applying them to a new environment, using the idiosyncratic characteristic of your new environment, that relies on assumptions. It relies on having the graph, which means it relies on level 2 assumptions, which are not all of them are verifiable by randomized experiment. So they can say, we don't believe that. Okay, we just believe a randomized experiment, but we cannot apply it from one environment to another. Okay? And what we are saying is that there are people are sometimes are capable of characterizing the idiosyncratic properties of their environment. And if you can do that formally, then you can transfer information from other experiments to your environment. That is a trade-off here. Evidently, if people do not use what is available in other experiments, they simply, it's a waste. Okay, so and people have a very good idea of what's special about their environment. Okay, like we have homeless, so we have whatever characteristics. Yeah, so they have to model it, but they have to be familiar with the art of modeling, and these people are are not trained in causal inference, so they are not familiar with the available technique. I made this point in my comments to Deaton and Cartwright paper on the limitation of randomized experiments. We do have today tools for combining experiments. Yeah,
as you said, maybe there's a challenge again in how we teach people about causal inference. So in a traditional statistics course, you will get at least an overview of what an RCT is and so on. But often we teach people that RCTs are the golden standard for establishing causation. And we are not talking about the limitations of RCTs. We are not saying, hey, this is the rank 2, right? This is the interventional questions. These devices can answer interventional questions, but not counterfactual questions. And so then it causes a lot of confusion because some people do not distinguish between ranks 2 and 3.
And the areas where they need level 3, immediate areas where they need it is to find causes of effect. You are having, you see the effect and you ask, what could be the factors that account for it? Okay, and then we go to the question of direct cause versus indirect cause, a distinction between necessary cause and sufficient cause, necessary and sufficient cause, all these quantities that answer the question about causes of effect. Those are beyond the reach of statisticians who are only interested in randomized experiments. They simply cannot answer. And I give you a simple example of having a drug which has no effect. But you don't know if the no effect randomized experiment can show no effect. You don't know if the no effect means no effect of any individual or kill some and save some.
Yeah.
Kill 10% and save. A randomized experiment will not be able to distinguish between the two models, but we have tools today to distinguish for them. For instance, tools that combine observational studies and randomized experiment. From these two, you can get right away bounds on the probability of harm, probability of benefit for each individual. Yeah. So they're missing. The people who are blind to level 3 are missing on those questions. And we know exactly what questions they are missing on. Yeah. Some of them will tell you we don't need this level. We never want. Ruben wrote in one case, causes of effect, he said it's for cocktail party. It's not scientific.
Oh.
Yeah. Because you can always go, what is the cause? You go to the first cause, you go to the Big Bang. Okay. So it's a cocktail party question. It's not.
Well, but we have Markov blankets and all this stuff, right? We don't need to go infinitely far.
Oh, look, there are questions, simple questions. I'll give you the possible code. I ask you, to what degree is it a sufficient cause? Like the but form criteria for in legal setting. Would the injury be occur but for the actions of the accused? It's a question which is constantly asked in legal setting, and we have the answer for it. We have a way of formulating it. We know under what condition we can identify it, what kind of data we need to do that. So the tools are available. The education is missing. I don't think they teach it in law schools. Okay, even in law schools that have the audacity of appealing to statistical method for answering questions, and some of the lawyers are interested. Those lawyers are still unaware of the available tools in causal inference.
I must say, I want to give you something that is a little bit more optimistic than what you said. I got an email from a lawyer who was actually talking about probability of necessity and probability of sufficiency, and he asked me for a review of his work.
Terrific.
So it happens. Maybe slowly, but happens.
It will take time. I hope the advent of the large language model does not cover the results in inference. Sometimes it may cover and it may expose them.
Cover in a sense that hide them,
bury them. Yeah. With the attention going into large language model rather than to causal inference, which is the foundation of our knowledge. I hope it not covers it, but it exposes it and amplifies it.
Hopefully. I think many people are getting more and more aware about the limitations of large language models, and the questions, when they ask the questions how to improve them, they inevitably go into causal questions.
The causal question gives it a framework. The kind of question you can answer, the tools are available. We know so much about human knowledge because of the causal inference results. This is our knowledge. So in every aspect that requires a user interface with the machine, you have to take into account the user structure of knowledge. And that's where it's going to play a role.
Do you think we will find or discover methods to automatically and efficiently learn user knowledge somehow?
To learn user knowledge?
Yeah, instead of, encoding it.
I think so, yeah. It's just another environment. If we can model an environment, why shouldn't we model the user? It's another black box.
Yeah, another set of variables, contextual variables.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So before we finish, I would like to do something new. So
Sing.
We can sing at the end. I'm happy to. So before I came here, I published on LinkedIn and Twitter a question to people. If they could ask you one question, what would that question be? And so I've just checked, and there are some comments from people. So I would like to read maybe one or two questions from them.
Okay.
Okay. So one question comes from Subhajit Das from Amazon, and he asks about the access to data. And he says, the access to data grows, and AI is becoming more polished than ever. And his question to you is, if you think that the day is near when true causality can be established with lesser assumptions, or is it the other way? So I understand that he says, like, we have so much data now.
I don't think data can make up for assumptions. Data just gives you data. In the asymptotic case, assuming that you have infinite data, so what do we have? Probability distribution, right? And most of the work, we in causal inference, we assume already conditional distribution or the distribution, right? Joint distributions. Okay? So the limitation that we found are limitation in the asymptotic case when you have infinite data. The kind of data that you get makes a difference, but not the size.
So that would be what we discussed before, right?
Before.
Yeah.
You cannot go from level 1 to level 2 if you have infinite data of observation only, passive observation.
Yeah. So this is about what is the content of the data rather than the size of the data.
Absolutely. But for him, how was the data obtained? Yeah.
Great. Let's see another one. Andy Wilson asks about causal discovery. What do you think about causal discovery software? He always got the sense that your crusade was that causal discovery shouldn't exist, but it also seems promising.
It shouldn't exist. I focused my work on the question, on a different question, not how to discover it, but assuming you have it, what can you do with it? Yeah, division of work. I let the CMU people continue the causal discovery. I watch it once in a while, the achievement and the improvement that they came up with. And I know there have been a lot of recent improvement, making the assumptions less stringent and others. But I just focus on what can we do with it instead of how to discover it. Look, you have to have a division of labor.
Beautiful. Okay. Some people just ask you question, why?
I think silent would be the best answer. If you don't articulate your query, don't expect the answer.
I leave it without a comment. Okay, so now we have also some questions from Twitter. How will causality be learned by future AGI?
In the same way that we learn it now, the same way that people learn it. I look at all the avenues where we can learn causality. What does it mean to learn causality? To learn a causal model, right? On the 3 levels. Same way that we learn it. Level 2 is learned by experiment. Level 3 is learned by hypothesizing, hypothesis, and imagination. We have the structure for that. So I hope it will learn by the same way that people learn it, like the way that scientists learn it. And I think we are doing very well in science, except it will be accelerated because we'll have a greater access on data and computation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The last question that we have here comes from Boris Sobolev.
I know him.
From Vancouver. Why bother with DAG-based identification instead of focusing on a more accurate specification of SCMs?
Well, what's the difference? I mean, DAG is just an abstraction of SCM. So why focus on a DAG? What do you mean, level 2 identification?
Yeah, I understand. I understand. So I understand why to only focus on DAGs, so the structure, rather than a richer specification of SCMs.
Elias just gave me a paper on identification in level 3. So I have it. I haven't read it yet.
Good. We'll link to this paper in the show description so everybody can refer to it.
Now, what can you identify in level 3? The functions themselves.
Yeah, it seems that that's the additional part of information that we get there, right?
But since we don't have a way of testing it, well, we have bounds on them. That's good. So you're right. We have, by combining experimental and non-experimental data, we have bounds on queries from level 3. So, yeah, we can learn to the extent that the bounds allow you to learn. Especially when the bound collapsed into a point estimate. Yeah.
Which happens sometimes.
Yes.
Yes.
And we know when. That's a nice thing. Yes.
Yeah. That's a great thing. That's true. Yuda, what question would you like to ask me?
That's a tough one. What? What did you do before you got into causal inference?
Into causal inference? So,
were you happy?
Well, I have an additional dimension of excitement today. But what I did, so, well, I was doing stuff related to psychology and neuroscience. And before that, I was a musician and a music producer.
Oh, that's what made you play the piano. That's where you play the piano.
Yes.
That's good. So we can end it with a good song. Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hasharet, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem leshalom, Malachei Hashalom, Malachei Elyon, Melech Malachei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
That was beautiful.
It's a good song.
It's a beautiful song, absolutely. I wanted to ask you 2 more questions before we finish.
Okay.
The first one is, who would you like to thank?
My teachers in high school and in college that always gave us the illusion that we can be contributing scientists. That we are not just users of science, but makers of science. Yeah. That each one of us can contribute something. It's a great gift for me. Yeah. So that's one thing that I want to. Who else? Well, I could mention 100 people, my students, who pushed me into areas that didn't want to go to against my will. And they taught me many new things. And what they say in the Mishnah, Mikol melamdai hiskalti umetalmidai yoter mikulam. I learned a lot from my teacher, but more so from my students. Thank you.
What constitutes a good life?
I think it's the illusion that you are part of a chain. And it comes in different level. I see myself as a part of a chain, okay? There was a big giants, Aristotle and all that. And I added a pebble there. Okay, that's good life. And the same thing goes for the family, right? My grandfather gave to my father, I give to my children. And that's it's illusion of being a link in a chain. But it gives some meaning to life. And finding something today that I didn't know yesterday, it's even it adds luster to the chain.
What would be your advice for people who are just starting with something complex and they see that there's so much to learn? Maybe they're starting with mathematics or machine learning or physics or causality.
I don't know. I would quit. I would not start something which looks too complex. I'll find with something that I feel that I can contribute something, that I master at least part of it, and from this little part I can expand. But I wouldn't get into an area which is too complex. Like, for instance, I don't know genetics, and I find it very hard to get into. It's too complex. I don't know how to get into. Yeah. So I quit.
So that we start small with something
if I
manageable.
knew at least one tiny areas of genetic relationship that I can relate to, that I really understand, from there I can grow bigger. I can expand.
Beautiful. It was a pleasure, Yuda. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Alex.
Thank you. It was also fun.